Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Hello and welcome to the Australian Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Kate Campbell, and today I'm talking to someone a little bit different, someone I've looked up to for a long time. His name's Paul Millard. He's based out of the US, and he's really encouraged me over the last few years to think about what work looks like, what good work looks like. Why do we follow the default scripts that our parents, that society tell us? And maybe we could think a little bit more creatively about how we design our life, how we live our life. Why do we have to follow the same scripts that everyone else is? Now, he has just released his new book called Good Work, which is phenomenal, would highly recommend, which really challenges us to reframe how we think about work. He uses storytelling, reflections, and really challenges our culture's obsession with effort and achievement, and encourages readers to notice the hidden costs behind even what they think is a good traditional job. So Paul shares about his journey of reorientating his life around what he calls good work, revealing the ups, downs, false starts, and joys along the way. Paul, I've been following your journey for quite some time now and was super excited to read your first book, The Pathless Path, when it was released. When I saw you just put out your second book, Good Work, I knew I had to get you on the show. Now, while we record a lot of episodes about investing in ETFs, finding good deals on groceries, and sorting out your insurances, I like to mix it up from time to time. There's so much more to life than numbers on a spreadsheet, and sometimes it's good to hear from someone who's challenged the default life path and made different decisions regarding their time, money, career, and family, and shares openly about the trade-offs. Paul, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you. Excited to dive in. And hello, Australians and anyone else that may be listening.
Where are you recording from today?
I'm in Texas in the US, in a small, not growing town of Austin.
We don't have too many guests from the US, given we're Australian Finance Podcast, but sometimes there's people with ideas that I really want to bring over. So thank you so much for saying yes to come on the show today. Now, before we jump into what I really want to talk about today, could you give listeners a little bit of background on you and how you ended up where you are today?
Sure. So the quick high level is I grew up in a small town in the US, was always the person that was the good student, did good in school, generally liked school. And then toward the end of college, got really excited about making it into the prestigious careers world. Now, I didn't go to the quote unquote right college where I could easily get access to those jobs. So I had to work really intensely and hard to break in as an outsider. Long story short, ended up breaking into strategy consulting, spent about 9 years in that world. What I like to call the default path. The default path is not any specific path, but it's sort of the story you grew up with that says, here's what I'm supposed to be doing as an adult. Right? Steady career trajectory, full-time employment, stable salary, things like that. And over that time, I went from somebody that loved what I was doing to becoming increasingly lost and even feeling trapped. And so in 2017, I decided to blow up my life basically and walk away from that path. I sort of had a hunch that I was on the wrong path, but I was scared to admit that even to myself at the beginning. But slowly over the first couple of years of that self-employment journey, gained more confidence, realized, oh, wow, this new setup of self-employment is amazing. And I want to stay on this path while at the same time feeling really insecure about it, feeling really vulnerable, having to face a lot of my fears and insecurities, and becoming actually curious about that and saying, okay, I do want to stay on this path. And it also seems weird and hard. Let me get curious about it, write about it, share it with people. And that really resonated with people. It started taking off in the pandemic. Like my readership just skyrocketed with all these people around the world who are questioning what is work. And it was like, hey, over here, I've been thinking about this obsessively for 3 years now. That led to my first book, The Pathless Path. and sort of confirmed that I did actually love writing. And I've slowly just started to increasingly build my life around writing, something I call like my good work, which is basically the name of my second book. And yeah, 7.5 years into this journey, having the time of my life is still weird. I'm still uncertain. I still am not quite sure what's next, but I'm more confident than ever that I want to stay in this path.
It seems such a strange notion, doesn't it, to really enjoy the work we do. Even when I talk to friends on the weekend, we might like aspects of our job, but we really like all of our job.
Yeah, and I totally resonate with that because I didn't even consider the possibility of liking my work. I think the best I ever thought was, okay, I'm going to like some of what I do. I think most people in modern jobs have that. But ultimately, this container I'm in, full-time work, is not going to be something I'm ever going to love. And I'm always going to be at war with it inside the job world. And even when I quit my job, my whole intention was like, I want to escape that. And my journey, basically in the first couple of years, was waking up to the fact that, oh, I'm doing all these things, writing, creating, even just like volunteering and helping people. And I really like it. And it really took about 1.5 years. And one day I'm just sitting around and being like, oh, I can like build a life around this. I can actually call this work. Even if the people in my life don't give me credit for that as work, right? So many people see work as a full-time job or formal employment or something that's steady. But I was finding work worth doing, what I was calling it, in tasks that I just wanted to do. And I think I was just so burnt out and drained from that former path, and it honestly job hopped to so many different jobs, sort of like ruling out that I could find any path forward, that it was like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to do things I like and follow this. And at the beginning, like I sort of just took a personal vow of poverty. Like I thought, okay, this is fine. The trade-off here is that I'm never going to make money. And that probably held me back, but I think was actually a really useful way to dive into this path.
You mentioned the default path before, because I think that's something that really transcends borders. A listener in Australia and a listener in the US is going to hear that and go, oh yeah, I've been told that story by my school, by my work, by my parents, that I need to graduate, go to uni, get a good job, buy the house, do all of that. And a lot more people are starting to question it, but I'm sure it came with challenges for you.
Yeah. So the default path is sort of like a script we grew up with. And if you look at cultural scripts, most people have stories about what they are supposed to be doing in adulthood, right? And most of it is school, university for some people. Other people don't have that. Good job, marriage, family, ... retirement. And so if you notice, with these scripts, there's basically like a 30 to 40 year gap where we have like no story in our head about what we're supposed to be doing. And so I was sort of positioning the pathless path as oppositional to the default path, but also an acknowledgement that life already is a pathless path. There's this amazing book by Bruce Feldfielden. I forget his last name, but he wrote a book called Life is in the Transitions. And he basically looks at like human lives. And he found that basically adults go through like 30 to 40 life transitions, right? But we don't have a story in our head to sort of tell us this is normal, right? Everyone I know has gone through something like death in the family, health crisis, right? Having a kid, having a second kid, getting married, moving in with a partner, moving out, breakups, right? And so everyone listening is probably like, okay, yeah, I've had one of those. But it typically doesn't fit into people's stories about what they're supposed to be doing, we sort of have this like disciplinary checklist in our head where like life is basically just an achievement. The problem with this is that if life is a steady and constant achievement, you're either succeeding or you constantly feel like you suck. And so a lot of my writing was really just trying to say to that broad swath of people, like, hey, it's weird, it's messy, and you're okay.
Now, you've spent the last few years thinking about what good work looks like to you, and I really enjoyed your latest book. I enjoyed The Pathless Past, so I'd recommend any listener read that, but also Good Work, which just came out. And I'd like to know, what does good work look like to you now?
Yeah, for me, it's really about a sense of connection. And so the story, that book starts, spoiler alert, with me sitting at a table in Taipei. That was 16 months after I quit my job. And so I moved abroad without a plan, didn't have any freelance projects, didn't really know how I was going to make money, but was really just embracing this idea that I would lean into the unknown, follow my gut, see where it took me, embrace the season of wandering. And during those days, I had lowered my cost of living dramatically. So I felt that like I could take maybe what I might call a sabbatical, but I wasn't calling it then. And just show up each day and go through the motions with what felt right. What happened is every morning I'd wake up and start writing. And increasingly, I'd be so excited. Like I'd wake up like ideas floating in my head and I'm like, all right, let's get this coffee so I can like sit down. And I felt good about what I was doing. About a month into doing that, I'm just sitting at the table and I'm like, oh, like this is work. And it took me a while to actually accept the term work. I was so like, I want to escape work that I didn't even accept it as work. I kept trying with like different words, phrases. I called it like the real work of your life. And really the phrase I've landed on is good work, right? It's the things worth doing. It's the things when you stop doing them, you feel like you have to do them again. It's a way to connect with yourself. It's a way to connect with something deeper. And it's sort of a way to connect with the world too. And even broader, sort of like that deeper connection around like a universal connection. It's a way to sort of like transcend. And I think a lot of people have experienced this, but they don't notice it because we're taught that like work is pain, work is suffering. We have all these stories and scripts in our head, or that like those aren't serious things. And so that's how I had written consistently for years, many blogs, shared my writing publicly, wrote for fun. And it took me 34 years of my life to realize that, oh, this could be work too.
It's interesting how much work is tied to being serious, getting paid, doing something that's not that fun. And we do get these scripts from around us, from our parents. Something interesting you mentioned at the start was that you had to sit in this uncertainty and unknowing for such a long time before you started to figure it out. And I think that's something we don't often like to do. If we want to change careers or we want to change what we're studying, we want to jump straight into the next thing. We don't want to leave this gap of just, oh, I'm not working. I'm not in a corporate job for a while, so I can figure out what's next.
Yeah. So there's a vast silent conspiracy where everyone is afraid and uncertain about the future, but no one wants to admit it. Right. And then there's self-policing on other people's behavior if they do admit they don't know what they're doing. People around them will go, what do you mean? What's your plan? What are you doing next? How are you going to make money? Right. And all that's happening in that exchange is that person is projecting their insecurities onto the other person. Right. And so this is sort of what I wanted to bring alive in my book, is that you might leave a path that is not yours, and you might find a new path, which is sort of on the right direction to something that feels better or feels good, but that often sucks. Like it's often really painful. It comes from people close in your life, sort of like pushing you away because you trigger their insecurities. It comes from people you love. It like comes from people you love judging you. What are you doing? Are you wasting your path? You're lazy. You just don't want to work. You're not responsible, right? All these things were like said to me, and often by people like I'm still friends with. It's just that like they have a story in their head about how life is supposed to go, and I wasn't fitting into that story. And so there's often a flip or like a complete like inversion when you become self-employed or start embracing an uncertain path, which is you go from visible benefits to invisible benefits. So what I mean by that is on a default path, you'll have like the money, status, title, and just proof of like you're going to do something every day. You might find a new path which you like more. And even if you're not making money, you don't know what you're doing at the first, you have these invisible benefits. Aliveness, sense of connection to yourself, right? You're showing up as a more generous and loving person in your life. You actually start to feel more stable, right? And these are things I feel now, but I can't prove that to anyone. And it's actually been really interesting for like the first 5 years of my path. Like I had a pretty small audience and I was basically just like writing every day and super happy. But I didn't have the extrinsic success that went with it. Now, about 6 years in, I had like my book, The Pathless Path, exploded. And suddenly, like people were starting to pay attention. It was really fascinating to just see like how important those extrinsic markers are to other people, right? But in reality, like I'm pretty much doing the same thing I was 5 years ago.
It just looks better to your parents now.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, if people come to you and say, I'm in this big corporate job or I'm working at a hospital, I'm doing XYZ, I feel like there's something else I could be doing or I want to be doing in my life, but I'm not sure. I don't know what course I want to enroll in. I don't know. I can't see a job I want to apply for. So I'm just going to stay here for now. What would you say to them?
Yeah. So I love those people. I'm not trying to turn people that like love their corporate job onto my path. I basically love the curious people. And so the most important thing I would recommend is don't self-gaslight yourself out of that curiosity. Don't like be really honest about your situation. If you are unsettled, just notice that. I am unsettled in my job. I am dissatisfied. Don't be like, oh, I should be grateful for this job because I make a lot of money or it gives me good balance. Just be honest with yourself. Hold it with lightness. And the second thing is just try stuff, right? So there's tons of things you can do. I think the minimum effective dose I've found in terms of experiments is basically going for a wander. So go for 2 to 3 hours. Ideally in the middle of a workday, if you can swing it without getting fired, and just go for a long walk. Go and take turns without a destination in mind. And so what you're trying to experience there is basically just like experiencing that small dose of uncertainty and trying to understand, okay, is this something I can handle? Something I can handle more of, right? Other things you can do are do things you did as a child or that you used to love doing when younger. And so you can do the same thing in the middle of a day. Go play the flute if you haven't played the flute in 20 years. What emotions does that bring up? And it's really about like reconnecting with yourself, right? So if good work is connecting with a work, but also connecting with yourself in like a body way, you're reconnecting with like the human spirit, the soul, right? And so you're really just looking for any portal to tap into that. Other things are like go travel somewhere, but like don't do it like checklistification. Go somewhere and just show up and no plan, right? Wake up, go find a coffee shop, and then ask the barista, where should I go today? Or ask just like sit with the uncertainty, not knowing, right? That often can be very transformative for people. And then I think ultimately, if you stay with this curiosity and you're like, okay, I want to keep going, I want to keep going. One, you have to meet other people who share these curiosities, because otherwise you will go insane. If all your friends are on the default path and triggered by your sense of curiosity and wonder for what might be, like, you're just going to think you're crazy. Like, you need to find people like you exploring different paths. Listen to podcasts of people. I've interviewed many people on my podcast. And also, like, go to events, try to meet new people and things like that. And then from there, just take a sabbatical. Like, fight for your life to find 3 months in your life to really tap into that uncertainty. And don't go into it with a goal. Your only goal with a sabbatical, well, you can have this as the goal, is to just figure out what to do next. Right? And pay attention to the clues that emerge, the feelings you have, and the interests that emerge.
That's so interesting, because I don't think we often give ourselves even 2 hours of silence. I heard you mention that exercise on another podcast, and I really thought to myself, have I walked in the last few years for 2 hours with no direction and no headphones in? And I really couldn't think of an occasion that I had. So that's definitely something I want to do soon.
Yeah, I do something called the 12-hour walk. It's an idea from Colin O'Brady, and you basically walk. There's an app you can install that basically just gives you a map and shuts down your phone, but you just go wander for 12 hours. And so I like to do this like once a year.
Yeah.
Just to get back in touch, like, with myself at the most basic level. And yeah, I think I walked like 25 miles around Austin last time I did it. So
You probably
yeah,
saw a lot of new places.
Yeah, I mean, I slept on a like park bench in the middle of the day. I sat and like wandered through paths I didn't know existed, and also it's just like, I don't know, it's just a different experience. So I think this is the most surprising thing. If I was telling myself this 10 years ago, I'd probably be like, who is this dude? Right?
Sounds crazy.
But I think my blind spot at the time was that I was disembodied. I didn't have a connection to my body. I didn't really trust my feelings or even know how to describe my feelings. And I had just turned myself into this like achiever that just keeps showing up the next day. You just keep doing the work. You keep doing the work. And that was fine at the beginning of my career. But by the end of that path, I was spending the majority of my time either preparing for, doing, or unwinding from things I didn't care about. And that can lead to extreme cynicism, right? And so a lot of what I'm writing about is letters to my former self trying to save me from my own cynicism.
Do you think if people are curious enough and lean into it, experiment, ask the questions, that everyone doing that kind of work can find their good work? Or is there some people that just might not find it?
Yeah, I think this is where I try to bring some nuance to it. I have a friend that loves surfing. And so he's designed his life around this. He has a blog, which he like pretty intensely for a couple of years did endless amounts of book reviews and just created this whole machine that like generated some money. Now that's declining again, and like passive income is never forever, but he bought himself time. Now he's using a lot of that time to like sink in, like soften himself into the journey of surfing and learning how to surf, right? I told him, I was like, I think this is your good work, right? And so this is the thing, like good work may or may not provide money. I think for me, like the practice of being a father, I watch my daughter, like I watched her all day until this interview today. It's 4:30. The practice of being a father is part of my good work in addition to writing. And so that doesn't provide money, right? So this is what I call like the puzzle of good work is, okay, you have your good work, but then there's probably like good enough work, which can ideally more pragmatically make money. And at the same time, still be aligned with things you don't despise doing, right? My whole goal with good work is actually just to avoid bad work. Bad work was the state I found myself in before I quit. I was spending the majority of my time doing things I didn't care about and didn't want to actually do, right? And so luckily, a feature of self-employment for me now is that doing those tasks that used to be like I could do them just because I had to please my boss. I can like barely spin up the motivation to do them now, right? Every self-employed person can relate with this. But over the years, over the last 7.5 years, it's all about like slowly steering it more and more toward designing work around things that are like good enough. And so a couple approaches I use with that. One, design my work seasonally. So I do teach these corporate workshops on communication and presentation skills. I'm really good at it and I do enjoy it. If I had $1 million, would I skip it? Probably. But I do need money. And so I design workshops that are like start and finish in a set finite period. And after I do those, I sort of like stop worrying about money for a while and write. And so that's sort of like worked for now. I don't know how long any of this will keep working, but as long as I can buy time to keep doing the things I care about, like having time flexibility to spend with my daughter and time flexibility to write without having to worry about instantly making money, I'm going to keep doing it.
Now, given we're a finance podcast, we have to talk about the money side of things. And
Yeah.
I'm sure for you, there were some trade-offs, like leaving a well-paying corporate job that may have been fairly secure and doing your own thing that would have had some trade-offs, moving to lower cost of living areas, dealing with the fact that you're seeing your friends do certain things with their finances and their lives and buying houses, and maybe you're doing something different. How did that impact your journey?
Yeah, I think these are all easier for me because me and my wife, we're just not super materialistic people. Like the idea of never owning a home is not like a tragic life outcome for us. And so I think for us, like we both value creative freedom and time freedom. And so some of these trade-offs are easier. And so basically in the first couple of years, I sort of tested that, right? If I hated that, I wouldn't still be on this path. Or I'd be trying to make more money. But what I did find when I lowered my cost of living, it's like, okay, now I need to spend less. Then I was like, I'm still pretty happy. What was I wasting all my money on? And so that works for me. But like, you shouldn't try to become like me. You should really try to own your desires. If you want a house, you should be honest about that. Right? And in Australia, the housing market is insane.
Touched
Right?
on a nerve there with listeners.
Yeah, I listened to an 8-part series in the housing market from Australia. Man, what a insane system you guys have. But it's very similar here. High cost of living areas. I have no path to own a home. Now, the good thing about the US is if I really wanted a home, I could actually afford one. I would just have to move to like a more rural area. But it is like doable. And so the other side of that is me and my wife are constantly needing to like reinvent our lives, strategize, come up with creative solutions now that we have a daughter. But the payoff is we actually enjoy that. And I like writing about it. So like that formula works for me. I would say generally like the people that are like, oh, I'd love to do my own thing, but like there's no way I could like do it like with my mortgage and my new cars and private school. It's like, well, you probably shouldn't do my path. Like I don't have a plan for funding my kids' education. I don't know if that's an Australian script, but like in the US, like that's a huge deal. Like that's like almost the new American dream, is like, I want to figure out all of this stuff for me and fund my kids' education. I have no plan for that. I also have no plans for like a really rich retirement based on our current trajectory. And so, yeah, it does come with trade-offs. And I face some judgment from family and friends based on that. Because basically, like, I think a lot of the world sorts by income now. A lot of people hang out based on like how much they can afford to do different things. Like the world is like a market of experiences now. And so, yeah, there's constant trade-offs. But for us, it's worth it. And we just try not to delude ourselves to and constantly have that conversation.
How did you start to find more people to inspire you to be curious about your life and not just follow the default path that everyone does? Because I can imagine that is quite a tricky step for many people.
I've always been curious. In college, my first class was a chemistry class, and I don't know if you can hear my daughter crying in the background.
A little bit. It's part of life.
Yeah. No, I'm not apologizing. This is a cool thing about being able to work from home and work remotely. In college, chemistry class, I go to the class and the professor just like lectures PowerPoint slides. And then he posts all the PowerPoint slides up after class. And so me and my friend are like, this is silly. Why are we going to class? So we were like, let's just like see how many classes we can skip. And so I skipped every class and only took the exams. Now I got a B+, which I think I was happy with. I probably could have done a little better. But this is to say, I'm somebody that's always looking for the edges, the other path, the other opportunity. And so even though I was on the default path, I was always exploring different ways of setting up my life. I was making job changes after a year at a company, or even 10 months in multiple scenarios, because like I just thought it was like time to move, right? And so I was always testing reality. So this is something that's always come naturally to me. Also just reading a lot, listening to podcasts and such. I've always been curious. It's just much easier to now be more curious and apply lessons to my life after not having a job.
I like it. Now, if people have got this far in the conversation, which I hope they have, what would you say to them taking away from this episode today if they want to just take one action today, this week, to start being a bit more curious about the world around them and what they might like to do and what their good work is?
I think one of the biggest things is that those work scripts. We all have stories in our head that we grew up with. What was the story you grew up with around work?
Well, my mum was the full-time earner. My dad stayed at home. So my mum expected me to do really well at school, do well in my career, and follow a similar path. I think I'm still seeing that pop up now.
Yeah. And so even if it's implicit or explicit or implicit, there's always a story, right? Some people have the story that you should do entrepreneurial things. Some people have the story you should work in a safe job. Some people have the story that you should try to become as rich as possible. I've heard from people in Australia that like having a boat is a metric of success. Is this a thing? Like a second home with a boat?
A second home would probably be pretty tough in Australia, so that might be a metric of success.
I don't know maybe I was thinking of a different country. But anyway, you have this story, and these stories are very, very powerful. They're basically memes that live in our head. And they really are like these invisible prisons that constrain not only our actions, but our imagination about possibilities for our life. And so just like write down, what are the stories you grew up with? One of the stories I grew up with was that work is a sacrifice, right? And that really kept me from noticing that work could be joyous and that I could feel so alive through work for so long. And so just notice. And then once you start noticing yourself, start noticing other people too. Like you're going to notice this everywhere around you. Other people will say, oh, I can't do that. I'm just an accountant. Right? Because a lot of people in career paths will say, only can imagine they can do what other people around them are doing. Right? I had a police officer message me today, and she's like, I'm questioning everything I want out of my life and path. 15 years into her career. Right? I don't know where she'll end up, but she's starting to figure it out.
And it might not even be leaving your career. It might just be finding a new way to do it, a new organization, or maybe you start your own business or you want to work with different clients. It might just be reimagining what you're already doing.
Yeah, I'm putting out an essay in my newsletter next week from a friend who left his job. He took a year sabbatical and then he started freelancing and he eventually went back to his exact same job. And what he found was that in those 2 years, he had basically redefined work's role in his life. It went from something that was like the center of life that he couldn't escape to something that like, it's like, oh, I'm just working, it supports my life. I don't need to feel so heavy about it, right? And so you can go through these transformations even inside a single container or a job. It's just realizing like, what do you want from work? What are the stories and scripts you grew up with? And what does that influence? How does that influence how you actually behave or relate to the work? And then more simply, like what is actually happening on a day-to-day basis? Do you feel good? Do you feel not good? Why?
I can imagine a lot of people that get home from work each day and just lay on the couch feeling quite drained might not feel that good. And maybe there's some ways they can start questioning what they're doing, why they're doing it. And is that something they want to keep doing for the near future?
Yeah, I think what I've found is if you're listening to this and nodding along and feeling excited, you're probably the type of person that needs to keep asking those questions. And so eventually you're going to have to start exploring them. Luckily, I tried to write my books as a like how-to guide, or not really how-to. They're more of like friendly companions on this exploration. But there's many other books like this too, many podcasts out there. And yeah, look for people that can be friends on your journey. I think that's probably the most important thing.
Amazing. Well, Paul, I'll put a link to your 2 amazing books, The Pathless Path and Good Work, in the show notes, plus your podcast and your newsletter. Is there any other resources you'd like listeners to check out?
That's it. I would love to hear. I always love hearing from people, and I'm often gifting books. If people have like co-working centers or conferences or events and they want me to donate books, I would love to do that.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure people can find your contact details on your website or your newsletter. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us in Australia today on your afternoon and sharing a bit about what good work looks like to you and how we can go about finding that in our own lives.
Thank you so much, Kate. It was great connecting.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.